Happy Friday and welcome to another episode of Brain Scratch. I'm John Lordan. Thank you so much for joining me here today as we look into another unsolved mystery. This one from 25 years ago, and it's a case that has been unsolved all this time. We have a family with unanswered questions and seeking justice, and maybe they're finally getting some help from someone new. The FBI has recently made an announcement in the case of Ann Culp. Sherry was simply at the end of her workday, went out to her car, got inside of it, and someone walked up and ended her life. But if that wasn't bad enough, Sherry is also a mother of two, and she was pregnant, 8.5 months pregnant with another daughter. Let's go ahead and learn more about this case. First of all, what is this announcement from the FBI? Here it is at fbi.gov. FBI announces $10,000 reward for information leading to arrest in unsolved murders. They've put out a video. They're putting out the call that they really need help to bring this case in. How does this case get to the level of the FBI? Let's see if we can answer that as we kind of go through the history of the case, the different things that they've tried to do in terms of investigating it. And we're also going to touch a little bit on what I believe is some of the family's information about facts, thoughts, and theories that they have. We'll take that with a little bit of a grain of salt because I can't confirm 100%, but I'll be sure to let you guys know when we hit those sources. Let's start with a quick stop at Wikipedia to learn about where this is happening. Springfield, Virginia. Springfield is a census-designated place in Fairfax County, Virginia, United States. Homes and businesses in bordering CDPs, including North Springfield, West Springfield, and Newington, are usually given a Springfield mailing address. So basically, we've got these other areas that are fairly large in themselves. This estimated population for this entire area is over 100,000 people. Some of the articles I'm seeing are referring to it as Springfield, the actual crime scene. Others are calling it Newington, so it's kind of hard to pin it down. In Google Maps, it actually considers it Springfield as well. The CDP is part of Northern Virginia, the most populous region of the Washington metropolitan area. What happened? Let's go ahead and pull up some old news articles. This one from the Daily Press back on January 19th, 1998. A woman who was 8.5 months pregnant died after being shot, but doctors successfully delivered her baby. Ann Culp, 36, of Stafford, had just left her Springfield office and was sitting in her car when she was shot in the upper body at about 6 p.m. Friday, Fairfax County Police said. She later died at Inova Fairfax Hospital, after which the doctors delivered her baby girl by cesarean section. The baby was in critical condition as of Saturday, says a hospital administrator. And Culp worked in the accounting department of Design Tech International, which is a manufacturer of electronic products. A neighbor told the news that she was married and she had 2 other daughters. What happened with Baby Kelsey? Let's continue at another page hosted at fbi.gov that has a bunch of details on this case. Sherry was fatally shot at point-blank range with a handgun by unknown assailant or assailants shortly after entering her teal-green Honda Civic at the end of her workday. She was flown to Inova Fairfax Hospital where Kelsey was delivered, but Kelsey only survived for 2 days. Essentially, I believe Kelsey was not thriving, being removed from her mother, and the family had to make the very hard decision to actually pull the plug. Several witnesses reported hearing gunshots and observing a man running on the sidewalk near the murder scene at Dynatech Court near Cameron Brown Court and Fullerton Road in Newington in Fairfax County. The man wore a dark-colored hooded jumpsuit. Additionally, a suspicious maroon pickup truck was also seen parked in the vicinity where the victim was shot. And here, of course, we do have a picture of Kelsey, but also a couple of photos from the crime scene. One thing I just wanted to note before we get into some of that material, Kelsey would actually be buried with her mother in her mother's arms, which I think it's heartbreaking, but also very special. And I'm just glad that they can make an arrangement like that in these terrible, terrible circumstances and know that Kelsey is where she belongs for eternity. So here we have the car, and not much to see here. I believe the driver's side window was up. We can see it does look like there's some broken glass here. Obviously, it does look like there's some blood in this area as well. But from what I understand, it's 2 shots. I think they both hit her in the head, and it was extremely quick, and the person fled on foot. Another picture of the car from this angle, kind of confirming the broken glass. You can see it didn't all fall out of the door. And this shot gives us a little picture kind of the building, and through that I was able to put together, based on this street description and that picture, the car was likely parked right around here where this white truck is, in this kind of industrial business complex. And of course, we're looking at it now. Let's see what the earliest street view we can do is go back to 2012. Pretty much all the same buildings still in this area. It just makes me curious what they might have had for surveillance footage. It's not quite the types of businesses that would necessarily think about maybe, protecting the front of their business, or it's not like they have a big glass storefront where someone might come in and attempt to rob them. So I don't know how many cameras we have in an area like this, but this is where it happened. And honestly, here we are 25 years later. So if they did have some compelling footage that could be helpful in this case, I'm pretty sure they would have released it at this point, especially with this last call that they put out this past month. Continuing with another article, this one from the Richmond Times-Dispatch as of January 22nd of 1998. Police say woman probably knew killer. The pregnant Stafford County woman who was shot to death last week likely knew her killer, authorities are saying. Police have no evidence that Sherry Ann Culp's attacker wanted to rob her, said Lieutenant Bruce Guth, a Fairfax homicide investigator. Obviously, if we don't have robbery as a motive, what is the reason there? This seems to have been something that was planned. And in particular, when we hear about what the witnesses saw, it certainly seems like this was a plan that involved more than one person as well. At this point, there's no indication that this was a random act of violence, Guth said. Now, let's continue with some articles. Unfortunately, these have been copied at Tapatalk, which I've used as a resource before. They usually cite where this information is coming from. Unfortunately, they're pointing back to another website that basically did the same thing that they do. This website just grabbed these articles and posted them, but that website, this one, littlestangels1.net, I was able to bring up a version of it, and unfortunately, they're not citing the original articles as well. I could tell by how these articles are written and the information that's in them that corroborates with other information from legit articles I've seen. These are indeed news articles from the time. I just can't tell you what the original newspaper was. But this article from January 15th, 1999, so now fast forwarding to the first anniversary of this tragedy. A year ago tomorrow, Sherry Ann Culp was trying to get her life back on track. At 36, Culp was beginning to fight for custody of her 2 daughters from her first marriage, while at the same time starting a life with a new boyfriend. Her mother, Jane Young, and her siblings were planning to throw a baby shower for her. Sherry was like the little lamb in our family who strayed for a little while and was trying to get back on the right path, her mother said. She loved life. Culp was sitting in her car outside Design Tech International, the company where she worked. Fairfax County Police said yesterday they have some clues in the case, but not enough yet to bring it to closure. Fortunately, here we are 25 years later, we still don't have it. We're trying to get help from the public, and we feel pretty sure that someone out there knows something about the case that can put us over the top, said Lieutenant John Tomaselli with the Major Crimes Division. We're just hoping to jog someone's interest and conscience as well. And of course, that's why we're doing this here today. First of all, as you can tell with these sources that I'm going to, a lot of this information is just falling off the internet. Even for a newspapers.com search, I only found a handful of articles. The information is disappearing about this case, and we want to make sure to try to capture as much of it as we can here today. But on top of that, I'm hoping that someone is going to watch this and maybe think, oh, I do have a piece of that. I really need to pick up that phone. If that person is you, we have all the contact information you need in the description box down below, including how to reach out anonymously. I get it. This looks like this is a possibility of a contract kill. Someone that was paid to do this. So obviously, there's probably a lot of fear for anyone that has information around this. just hoping with the 25 years that have passed, maybe relationships have changed. Maybe people are in different situations where they feel safer and able to talk about that. It's kind of what I'm hoping for. Over the past year, police released descriptions of 2 men seen sitting in a maroon Ford Ranger pickup in the area minutes before the shooting. The truck was parked on Fullerton Court, about 200 yards from where Culp was shot. So let's take a look real quick at the information that police would wind up releasing. Of course, we have a picture of Sherry. We have a picture of Kelsey. But then we have a picture of 2 men, one of them described as a white man with sandy brown hair. That's this image in the middle. And then we also have a description of a black man here on the right side. And then they've got this picture of a truck. I've actually pulled up another photo of a truck. It's supposedly a maroon Ford Ranger from that time period. So it should look something like this. I'm not exactly sure. The year hasn't been released. So it's something along these lines. Unfortunately, a Ford Ranger, very, very common vehicle. So, when you're looking at this case and wondering, well, why hasn't it been solved? There was witnesses. They saw the truck. I don't know if anyone got license plate information. If they didn't, this is probably a very difficult search in any area that has a number of trucks like that. Also, real quick, before we continue on, they're saying that the truck was actually parked on Fullerton Court, which we take a look at this map here. This is about the location where her car was parked. There is a Fullerton Road, but if they're correct about it being Fullerton Court, that's way down over here, and I'm not seeing any easy path between the two. So I don't know if that was actually chosen maybe by the people that pulled this off as an escape route. If they did perform the shooting here, run down through the end of the cul-de-sac, I don't know if there's ways that they could have gone between these buildings. There probably is. I mean, we're talking about this kind of industrial area. If we look at the current satellite photo we have here, it looks to me like you probably could have figured out a path to get from that side, get through these buildings or around these buildings and then over to Fullerton Court. But if that's the case, there's even a better chance that they might have come across some cameras as they were running this way. And perhaps they did, perhaps there is footage, but perhaps law enforcement just isn't releasing that. However, there's also the possibility that they just got the name wrong. Maybe they were actually parked on Fullerton Road. It would kind of make more sense in terms of a getaway to be on the road that could get you more quickly up to the bigger parkways. And I mean, here we've got a whole highway interchange. But if they are correct about Fullerton Court, I do think that means that the shooter would have ran fairly close to these buildings, and that could have increased the possibility, especially if it was the end of the workday for several people, other people that might have been coming out to their cars. We've got a whole parking lot right here. Maybe that's why we do actually have some witness accounts when it comes to this case. But let's continue back with the articles. One man was seen getting out of the driver's side of the truck and walking in the direction of the shooting. He was described as black and wearing a dark jumpsuit with a hood over his head. Later, he was seen wearing a dark jumpsuit and running from the scene towards the truck. In terms of witness information, that sounds pretty solid, and it sounds like they've got the right person that they're seeing. It's just how much of that information is going to come along into the composite sketch, and then is someone going to recognize that and act on it? What was the other guy doing? Let's see if we can learn about that here. The second man was seen sitting in the truck. He was described as white, in his 30s, and about 6 feet tall with sandy brown hair. Police released a sketch of the second man. So actually, I might not be 100% correct on this sketch. Part of the problem in terms of looking at a case like this where the articles are disappearing is the images are also disappearing. Even for some of the articles where they're still posted at their original locations, like the Washington Post, for some reason the images are all missing from there now. So I did see some other descriptions saying that one of the images released was actually a person that her ex-husband was seen speaking to. So I just want to put that out there. There's a possibility that this image on the right is not the person that was seen in the hood, and they're actually not drawing him in a hood, so there's a very good chance of that. This image on the right might be a person that was seen in a restaurant with her ex-husband, which we'll get to those details as well. This guy went there specifically to do this, said Tomaselli. We truly believe this was a hit, said her mother. Young said that she has some clues as to who might have killed her daughter, but she declined to elaborate. We feel so much anger, she said. I don't think police would let us confront that person. I can't forgive that person who took my daughter's life away. This person took away a wonderful life, 2 lives. I hope he rots in hell. Now, of course, I've already mentioned we do have an ex-husband, but we also have a boyfriend. We know the stats on cases like this, and we're going to learn some other troubling statistics as we're looking through this here today. Obviously, we've got 2 persons of interest right off the bat that should really be looked at and investigated. She grew up in Springfield and graduated from Hayfield High School. After graduation, she married Donald Culp and moved to Stafford, Virginia, where she raised a family. She had 2 daughters, Lauren, who is 10 as of the time of the writing of this article, which is a year after the shooting, and Heather, who was 8 at the time of this article. The Culps were divorced in 1994, with Donald Culp gaining custody of the 2 girls. After the divorce, Culp lived with her parents in Springfield for about 8 months until she met Al Barnett, Kelsey's father. Culp moved in with Barnett, so now we've got the boyfriend introduced. Barnett and Donald Culp could not be reached for comment. Now Young and her husband Ken, which I believe Ken is actually Sherry's stepfather, are fighting Donald Culp for the right to visit with Lauren and Heather. As we unfortunately see in a lot of cases of this nature, we have the parents of a victim, the grandparents of these children that all of a sudden don't have any legal rights. And as we frequently see, the parent that does have the rights starts limiting how much time those grandparents can spend with the children. And in this case, it's about the worst possible outcome with that. It gets to the point where Donald actually moves the family completely out of the state and basically cuts off the grandparents altogether. Young said, at least at this time, that they were allowed to see the girls 1 Saturday a month. We're trying to keep Lauren and Heather in our lives, she said. Fast forward to 2002. This is another article, different article. I'm not sure if it's from the same paper or not. Fairfax County, Virginia. Police yesterday searched the home of Donald Culp, 40 years old, looking for a handgun, ammunition, cash transaction, and phone records, as well as secret audio tapes of his ex-wife Sherry's phone conversations with friends. It sounds like they got some extremely detailed information. We're talking 4 years after the instance here. And then for them to act in that way. This is after the family has moved. They're living in another state, Donald and the daughters, as well as a girlfriend that Donald had that I believe he actually wound up marrying. The Culps divorced in 1996 after a 2-year separation. Donald told his neighbors and friends he believed his wife was seeing another man when they divorced, police said. Based on some of the information I'm seeing, I believe that actually is Al, and I believe that Al might be Donald, a friend of Donald's, which of course just raises all the emotions around this whole situation. I do just want to put it out there with a little grain of salt because I'm not 100% sure. It could be that she was indeed seeing another man that was Donald's friend, and then that ended in some way, and then she started seeing Al. That's a possibility as well. I don't know 100% because I'm trying to piece this all together the best that I can for you guys. But regardless, Donald does tell friends and neighbors that he believes his wife was seeing another man at the time when they divorced. But they did not take a gun or audio tapes from the home, according to an inventory of seized items. Police took mostly financial records, address books, correspondence, and computer-related items. Investigators were told Donald Culp confronted his wife with the phone tapes and have told her mother and stepfather about them, the search warrant states. So it seems like these tapes, at least at one time, did exist. Could it be that he got rid of them in that 4 years? Very likely, especially if we're talking about a move. Why is he going to hold on to that stuff that could potentially be used as evidence against him if he's part of this or not? Police also found statements significantly differing among witnesses who provided alibis for Donald Culp and Tony's story. Now, Tony is his girlfriend who he later married. Police believe other unnamed people were involved in the slaying, the warrant states. For me, for how this sounds, now I can't find a picture of Donald. I don't know what Donald looks like. I don't know if he looks like the composite sketch of the man with sandy hair. if this is a murder for hire situation, I'm just theorizing here. If Donald is part of this, if you're going to go to all that trouble, aren't you going to try to make sure that your alibi is rock solid? Are you really going to want to be part of that? Are you going to be in the truck driving the person there if you're paying someone else to do this? I wouldn't think so. I would think that there would be a strong possibility, if that's true, that whoever paid for this was somewhere else. Two guys that did it went and did this. So we're talking at least three people that are directly involved. And it seems like that's kind of being alluded to here based off the information they're getting from the warrant that they're writing about in this article. Donald Culp said yesterday that the search came as a surprise. He declined to comment further. He's denied any involvement in his ex-wife's death. After the slaying, Culp moved to Rocky River, and that's in Ohio, and remarried. So he got completely out of the state. Culp was cleared in the initial investigation, but learned 3 or 4 months ago that police were reinvestigating. Pretty interesting. I can't find details on why he was cleared in the initial investigation. We're going to find some information later that might explain some things that happened when he was investigated initially, but honestly, it still doesn't make sense that those things would have cleared him necessarily. Donald Culp quit his $72,000 a year Cleveland Health Department post in July of 2000 after neighbors and coworkers received unsigned flyers alleging he failed to cooperate with the police investigation. So here, someone was complaining, saying that he wasn't cooperating. He said at the time that he was concerned the flyers' allegations might reflect poorly on his boss, former Mayor Michael R. White. So leaves an elected post, from what I understand, and gets out of the state. I don't think the flyers necessarily stop there if some of the later information that I've bumped into is true. And if you guys are wondering, is this something that Sherry's family is doing? I can't tell you 100% sure that that's true. I can tell you I'm bumping into some social information that looks like that might be a possibility here, that essentially possibly her stepfather might be letting people around Donald's life know that he's at least a person of interest in a murder case involving his ex-wife. How is this family dealing with everything? We get a little sense of it here from the Washington Times. There was no robbery. No exchange of words was overheard. The gunman remains at large. Quote, "You always think when there's a clue, when someone calls, that they're going to crack the case," said Jane Young, Mrs. Culp's mother. It never seems to happen. The couple sent out press packets, gave interviews, and persuaded John Walsh to profile the case on TV's America's Most Wanted. "In the beginning, I tried everything I could to speak to whoever I could," Mrs. Young said. She often appeared at forums for families of crime victims. As time went on, I stopped going because all the families had their cases solved. I came out of those meetings feeling very angry because our case was the only one that hadn't been solved. Every day I think, what is this going to do for the family if we do solve this case? It won't bring her back, said her mother. Police don't have DNA samples that could be linked to the culprit. I mean, think about the logistics of this case. We have literally a person walk up to someone physically separated from them, at least with something as thick as a pane of glass, and then much more than that with the rest of the vehicle. There's no real direct interaction. There's no point that I can think of where this perpetrator would touch the victim, reach in, try to grab Sherry or something like that. It literally sounds like this case is walk up to the side window, pull the trigger twice, turn around, and get out. The only point of contact you have really is this person's shoes on the ground, and then potentially witness information, which thankfully there was some witnesses here. We got some solid details, but just not the thing that's bringing this home yet. But obviously no DNA. But even with 2 shots fired, something else does get left behind. Shell casings were the only evidence recovered. The casings were entered into a ballistics database. So if the same gun is used in another crime, there could be a match. So they do have shell casings, but no weapon and no DNA to speak of, which obviously makes this case very tough. This article certainly kind of points in a certain direction, and quite honestly, this whole case does. That's part of the challenge in reviewing cases that the news coverage is really limited on. We don't have a ton of social information. This case is from 25 years ago, so it's not like, there was giant Facebook threads where people were talking about this, and we can kind of get where people's minds were and hear about other potential persons of interest. There was one website that's local to this area that would kind of host a conversation about this case. And we're going to get into some of that information after we get through all the official information. But here at cbsnews.com, pregnancy's biggest danger, homicide. I wasn't aware of this, but let's learn about this together. Sherry's parents believe whoever hired the hitman was motivated by rage over the pregnancy. I think the baby was definitely the cause of her death, admitted her mother, Jane. Now, just looking at this from the outside and being kind of simple in terms of what we know about this, we already have a dispute going on. Sherry is going to try to file for more custody rights of her daughters. We have the ex-husband likely very upset that Sherry was cheating on him, and then that could have been bolstered by the fact that it makes it even worse that it was a friend of his. We've got a lot of high emotion really pointing all in one particular direction, which is really the ex-husband. The only information I can find that's saying anything about the boyfriend is pretty much people just saying he was happy. He was happy about the pregnancy. They were living together already at this point. She had moved in with him. So it's one of those things where everything is kind of looking in one direction with this case. And it's pretty clear, I think, that the family is feeling that as well. But the little known truth is murder may be one of the leading causes of death among pregnant women. Isabel Huron, who studied the problem in Maryland, was stunned by her own findings that a pregnant woman is more likely to be murdered than to die of any other single cause. In her report in the Journal of the American Medical Association, it shows that she analyzed 247 deaths of pregnant women over the course of 5 years. 20% of those had been murdered. The leading cause of death for the 247 that she looked at. That is just mind-blowing. And I know that we talk about it all the time, the stats on intimate partners being involved in something like this. Just right off the bat, there's like a 75% chance that someone that's murdered, that it's going to be done by someone that they know or someone that's within their social circle. I think it's as high as 50. I'm kind of going off the top of my head here, but I think it's 50% of those total cases are going to wind up being a direct intimate partner. So it's hard when you look at a case of this nature. It's hard to not look at that in that direction. And obviously, it seems like the family's looking in that direction. It seems like when we have articles that are kind of wrapping up information like that in a retelling of the story of Sherry's death, seems like even these news agencies are kind of looking in that direction as well. Let's continue at the Washington Post. Culp's family refuses to walk away. Last spring, at a meeting with Fairfax homicide detectives, Jane Young stood with an envelope of family photos that she had mailed to her two granddaughters, now 11 and 13. This article is from 4 years after the shooting, who live with Culp's ex-husband. So basically, grandma sent a bunch of pictures to the girls. The photos had been torn to bits and mailed back to Young by her former son-in-law. She slowly shook the shreds out of the envelope onto the conference table in front of the stunned investigators. They're very frustrated about what happened, Detective Steve Malefsky said of the Youngs. All they want is to find out who killed their daughter and why. For Donald Culp and his lawyer, Jay Milano, Young's tactics are increasingly frustrating. So essentially, Donald, I believe, and his wife are making complaints that they're being harassed by the Youngs. And eventually he gets a lawyer who starts kind of commenting about this as well. And here they're saying that not only is it frustrating, it's also unfair. Milano said that even before Fairfax detectives spent nearly 8 hours searching Culp's house, he was trying to arrange for a meeting between his client and Malefsky. He had sent a letter to Malefsky and Fairfax Commonwealth's attorney Robert F. Huron Jr. proposing that Culp come to Virginia and meet with investigators. There's no evidence he killed his wife because he didn't kill his ex-wife, Milano said. Malefsky alleged in an affidavit for the search warrant that Culp has failed to cooperate with the police and refused to take a polygraph. So it's interesting to me to hear that at some point they actually took him out of consideration for this. I don't know if maybe they just said that to the press. We do see that sometimes in cases where law enforcement will basically say, this is not a person of interest in this case. And then sometimes years later, all of a sudden that person gets arrested and charges get filed. But here we are basically getting it from documentation written by law enforcement. Culp failed to cooperate with the police. He also refused to take a polygraph, which I know many of you out there would not take a polygraph. I totally understand that. But not cooperating with the police on top of that, even to the point of, hey, look, if you want to get an attorney, yeah, get an attorney to be part of that conversation. But wouldn't you have some interest in finding justice for the mother of your daughters, if nothing else? I don't know. It's really troubling when I see situations like this and to hear things like that. This person of interest just, failed to cooperate at any level. Like I get about being smart, being safe, having your lawyer present, maybe not taking that polygraph, but how about having that meeting and not waiting 4 years until they come after you and take your house apart looking for stuff like this? This could have been headed off, I think, years before this. He did say that Culp met with police 3 times in 1998 and that he was told no polygraph was necessary. So this is what the lawyer is saying. Lawyer is saying, no, Culp actually did meet with police 3 times back around the time that this happened and was told by the police no polygraph was necessary. His attorney might have been told that. I really have trouble believing that. I can't imagine. Can you guys imagine any investigator looking at this case, having that guy sit across the table from you and telling them, nah, we don't have to do a polygraph? I don't think that that's reality. Milano said he would not allow Donald Culp to comment for this article. So lawyer keeping very tight control of the conversation around this as well. And admittedly, this guy's house was just raided. So that's probably, again, if you're looking at this from the point of view of maybe this guy's innocent and he's just trying to be as smart as possible, maybe that's a good move on his lawyer's behalf. They were just searching his house for 8 hours. Malefsky also located a new witness. Now, things get a little interesting here, who said that he saw Donald Culp meeting with a man at the Bennigan's restaurant near Landmark Mall in Alexandria several weeks before Sherry Culp was killed. The witness thought the meeting was unusual because Donald Culp, a chemical industry consultant, didn't work or live anywhere near Landmark. It's curious. It's interesting that it stuck out to the person so much that they would remember it. We don't know how this person knows Donald, but it seems to me that this person would have to be familiar with Donald Culp in some way to have recognized him out there. And who's to say this wasn't a business meeting, a business lunch, something along those lines? We have no idea. But it is interesting that Malefsky's bringing this up and talking about, hey, we've got this new witness, and he said that he saw this other guy meeting with Donald Culp at this place that really doesn't make sense. Now, this is what I was talking about earlier. They're saying that they released a composite sketch of the man that met with Donald Culp in hopes of finding him and speaking with him, but you can see here the image has been removed. I think there's a chance that that is this image here on the right. I think. Just doing the best we can with what we got. Witnesses to the shooting did not get a good look at the masked gunman, but other witnesses had seen a similarly dressed black man climb out of a nearby pickup truck and walk toward the area minutes earlier. They also saw a white passenger in the truck, and police released a composite sketch of him. So this does seem to support that's the guy that was sitting in the truck. And it seems like there is no composite sketch of the black man that walked over and did the shooting. Her boyfriend at the time was cleared of involvement. So Al, cleared of involvement. Police turned their attention to her ex-husband on the theory that he had hired a shooter. Jane Young said her family treated Donald Culp warmly during his marriage to their daughter, but relations deteriorated after the divorce. Sherry Culp told friends that her ex-husband was threatening and abusive over child support and visitation. Milano said, "It isn't unusual for a man whose wife cheated on him to be angry. But you can't blend that with the time frame of the killing, during which Milano said relations between the Culps had actually improved." Police said Sherry Culp was distraught over the situation as late as the night before her death. After the killing, Sherry Culp's parents gradually lost access to their granddaughters. But as we also sometimes hear about in cases like this, that access to the granddaughters eventually can change when they become adults themselves. Here is an article at the Daily Item from 2013 titled "Unsolved Murder Victims' Daughters Embrace New Lives." And here we have a picture. This is Ken and Jane Young. So we've got Sherry's stepfather and Sherry's mother here holding up a picture of her with her daughters. Let's see how this all turns out. Donald Culp was considered a suspect in the case. Sherry's daughters, Lauren and Heather, were just 9 and 7 at the time. Jane and Ken Young pursued every avenue they could think of to seek justice for their daughter. They offered $50,000 of their own money as a reward for information that could lead to an arrest. They kept in frequent contact with police. But 15 years later, Sherry Ann Culp's murder remains unsolved. Jane Young admits, "I will be even keeled for months, and then all of a sudden, I'll have to call the detective and say, 'What are you doing? This family needs closure.'" That anger, the anger of a mother robbed of closure for the death of her daughter, has driven the well-mannered grandmother of 19 and great-grandmother of 5 to punch walls. "Someone took away a beautiful girl with so much to offer," she said. After Sherry Culp's death, Ken and Jane Young saw little of their 2 young granddaughters. As the case heated up, the Youngs say Donald Culp and his girlfriend Toni Story began returning the grandparents' phone calls with less and less frequency. Then, without telling the Youngs, they moved from Virginia to Ohio. The Youngs sued Donald Culp for visitation rights to the girls, but lost in court. For almost 10 years, they said they had almost no contact with their granddaughters. 5 years ago, the Youngs finally came back in contact with Lauren Culp in an email. "This is our year," I wrote to her, Jane said. "I told her that I would not lie to her. I will never lie." One email led to another, which eventually led to the Youngs' first meeting with their granddaughter in more than a decade. It wasn't long after that, Heather Culp reunited with her grandparents too. The 4 of them have since enjoyed time together. "We are overjoyed that Heather and Lauren are developing into wonderful young ladies," said Ken. I mean, think about this, guys. Up until this point, they had no contact. I think Jane had actually found their MySpace pages, and that was the best she could do, is check in on their MySpace pages and see pictures of them and think, wow, they really look like my daughter. But thankfully, we get to the point where they're adults. They're able to think for themselves, process this information how they want to process it. They do get back in touch with their mother's parents. For the Youngs, there is the joy of reunion, the joy of seeing their granddaughters, who they say have been through more than enough tragedy for a lifetime, successful and happy. There is joy and there is pain. But in October of 2014, Lauren Culp and her fiancé, Nathan Robertson, will marry, and as their granddaughter and grandson-in-laws kiss for the first time as husband and wife, the Youngs believe Sherry Culp will be there in spirit watching. It was a really sweet aspect of this story, but essentially, Nathan asked Lauren's grandfather for her hand in marriage. So the grandparents got to be kind of part of that, but it also brings up those other tough feelings of, wow, this really should be something that, is happening with Sherry and Sherry's husband at that time. But unfortunately, that's not going to be part of this. "We have a lot to look forward to," Jane said. Honestly, from this point, it just looks like there's not a lot that happens with this case. In 2020, we get another little push here at patch.com. The Fairfax County Police Department has launched a cold case webpage to give more visibility to unsolved homicides. The page features cases spanning 6 decades, all the way from the 1960s to the 2010s. Of course, that includes the 1990s, and you guys know what case we're talking about today. So that case is part of this. The Cold Case Squad was formed in 1995. It investigates unresolved homicides and unsolved sex crimes in Fairfax County. We are committing countless hours and all available resources to close these cases and provide long-awaited answers to victims' families and bring those who committed these awful crimes to justice, said Major Ed O'Carroll, commander of the Major Crimes Bureau. And I checked their website. It is still there. They still have the cases broken out by decade. And here we can see Sherry Ann Culp and Kelsey Laughlin. And then we get to pretty much current, January 19th, 2023, a tweet by Paul Wagner. I covered this case several times over the years. Now, on the 25th anniversary, the FBI puts out a reward poster and says it is working with federal prosecutors in Virginia. What's changed? What happened to Sherry Culp? Great questions. I don't know what could have changed. I mean, thinking about the FBI getting involved and then them being in contact with federal prosecutors kind of leads me down the path of thinking, is this connected to Donald? Because we're at that federal level, that usually only happens when we're talking about suspects that are no longer in the state. That kind of hands off that jurisdiction and about how these things are processed. So is it related to Donald, or is it something else? Is it that maybe they found one of the two men from the truck? Maybe they also fled the state. I don't know. And obviously Paul Wagner doesn't know here either, but kind of a little renewed push that's happening this month. And of course we want to be part of that, and you can be part of that too. Please share this video. Let's make sure that we get some eyes and ears open and looking and trying to help with this case. It obviously needs it. We're here 25 years later, trying to figure this out, still talking about this case. Who did this to Sherry, and who also took Kelsey away from this world? So that's it for the official sources. But I did find kind of a bulletin board called Fairfax Underground. And these are comments starting from around 2011 about this case. And, you know, there's 3 pages of comments here in total. I would say 2 of those pages probably not worth a lot of your time. This is a comment thread that gets hijacked by one person in particular, and they honestly almost invalidate the usefulness of the rest of the information here, which quite honestly, I think there's some solid information here. I do believe that Sherry's stepfather is posting in this comment thread, but we have to take this with a grain of salt because we don't have a real solid confirmation on that. That's part of the reason why I appreciate Web Sleuth's approach so much, because first of all those comments that are basically ruining this thread wouldn't have even survived. They would have removed them from Web Sleuths. But also, as soon as this information started coming in that seems pretty clear that it's coming from a source close to the case, Web Sleuths would actually verify that, and then we would be able to lean on it stronger. So we can't quite lean on it the same way we would with information from there. Just remember, this is social. Let's see what people are saying here. The first comment I want to point out is one that is someone reporting to be the stepdaughter of Donald Culp. This one posted September 2nd, 2011. The ex-husband has nothing to do with this murder. I am, in fact, his stepdaughter. What the articles conveniently forget to mention is that the boyfriend failed a polygraph test. Also, the fact that the Youngs stalked us to the point where my family went after a restraining order. Like I mentioned, and I have seen in some of the other legit articles, I do think that that Donald Culp and his family were complaining that the Youngs were harassing them. So I do believe the second part of this. I haven't run into anything saying that Al failed a polygraph test. What we do have is pretty direct information from law enforcement saying that Al was actually cleared early in the investigation. So it's interesting to me. Once again, this might not even be real. I mean, who knows? This user her name is KStory614. She's claiming to be the stepdaughter. It could be someone that is just, trying to fake us all out on a message board. I have no idea. Then we get to comments being posted by this person called Truth Seeker. Now, it's my belief, I'm just being very clear about it. I believe that this is an account created by Sherry's stepfather. I think there's also comments left by Sherry's mother in this thread. But this one in particular, just the amount of time and energy that it would take to engineer a message and for the type of response that you would get off something like this, I don't think that this is faked. If it is faked, Jane or Ken, if you guys reach out to me, let me know about that. I will absolutely edit this whole section. I will cut it right out of the video going forward. But at this point, it seems legit to me, and I think you guys will agree with me once we get into this. So this is reportedly an email thread between Don Culp and Sherry's stepfather. Sent to Don Culp January 16th, 2013. My opinion, Don Culp murdered his wife. And that is a statement by Ken Young, August 24th, 2012. Before I get dementia or die, I want to state the facts that support my opinion. My opinion is based on observations of behaviors and known facts. And I'm not going to go word for word on this, guys. Like I'm telling you, I believe this is legit. Some of it I can tell is them being hurt about the grandchildren being separated from them. There's some other details in there related to the grandchildren I don't think we need to get into. I'm really drilling this down to pieces of information that I think are going to help the understanding of this case, assuming that this is legit. So we've got a few very big grains of salt that we're taking this with, but there's a large amount of evidence and observed behavior to support my opinion. There are only two suspects, Don and Al. Al interviewed with the police without legal representation and took several polygraph tests and was eliminated as a suspect. Don would not talk to police without having legal representation and Tony present, and Don has refused taking a polygraph test. So honestly, based off the articles, I didn't even think that Don had spoken to the police at all. Here, it sounds like he actually did. It's just he did insist on having legal representation and his girlfriend or wife at the time there with him. Don and Al both told me that the other man did it. Don has never told anyone in the family that he did not do it. Now, we did hit a comment from him in one of the articles earlier that seemed like it was pretty clear that, well, it wasn't a comment from him. It was someone stating that he said that he is not responsible. I think it came through his lawyer also. Within hours of the murder, Don was notified by me, and the police knocked on his door and left a card, and he never did call the police, but rather called Sherry's sister in the middle of the same night and talked to her for about an hour about what was going on. Following the murder, I talked to the babysitter working for Don, and it was evident that there was time available to commit the crime. When it comes to that, just kind of rolling with that scenario I was thinking of before, I'd be assuming that I was going to try to pull off something like this. Obviously, you guys know I never would ever even dream about doing something like that. But if you were going to pay someone to go do this, you're going to create an alibi that can be corroborated very strongly, right? So you sitting at home for the night, probably not the best. Having a babysitter actually kind of helps it. And then if you go to a public place, hey, we went to a movie theater, I went out to dinner with my friends, I'd be looking for cameras, trying to make sure that I was being seen by those cameras, and then trying to point back to that stuff later. I'd be collecting receipts. I'd be using my credit card everywhere. There's all kinds of trace evidence that I'd be dropping all over the place to basically bolster that alibi. Maybe that would give it away because I'd be so obnoxious about it. So this, honestly, not a knock in my mind. It's not really putting a check mark in terms of Don being directly related to the shooting. It's also not removing the possibility that someone could have been paid to do this. So I don't think it really helps on either side, but I get what he's pointing out. So they spoke to the babysitter, and Don wasn't home at the same time that this was happening. My information from the police is that the alibi couple covering the time Don and Tony and Don's daughters were eating dinner the night of the murder recanted. Now that's interesting, and just knowing that there's some connection with the family that's reformed. I don't know if they're talking about daughters that Dawn had with Tony, or maybe had in another relationship, or if they're talking about their granddaughters. If they're talking about their granddaughters, I'd be asking all about this night. But to my earlier point, I would think that Dawn probably would go out with a group of people to firm up that, hey, I was somewhere else. I wasn't responsible for this. So it's interesting that that couple would have recanted. I don't know what to think about that. At police request, I looked at several weeks of Don's phone communications after the murder, and after about 2 weeks, he shut down all communications with the family. Don, without notification, took our family members out of state to Ohio to live. He and Tony sold a very nice home and left Virginia suddenly after getting married. I sent an anonymous letter to Don's neighbors and employer in Ohio stating the facts of the murder and that he was a murder suspect, and he left his political appointment, and he never raised the issue with me or sought any damages from the consequences to him of my factual revelations. I get what he's trying to say in that point. Essentially, if he was slandering, if he was to be held for libel or slander, you would have to prove that that information was inaccurate. And he's kind of pointing out, hey, look, I've given this guy some grief with this information, and he hasn't sued me for it. No official complaints filed around any of that stuff. I mean, look, the guy left his job. The guy left the state. He's taking all the steps. Like, you would think he'd be able to go in front of a judge and say, hey, look, these people are harassing me so badly and they should pay for that. And we're not seeing that. So I get that. But I also get Ken saying that, hey, these are factual. So if he did try to complain about this stuff, he wouldn't be able to. Lauren and Heather sought out Jane and their mother's family and started talking to them and reestablishing a loving relationship. They talked about living with Don and Tony. They talked about being forbidden to use social media or cell phones. There's some parents that are going to do that. And I don't think that that's necessarily tied to, it doesn't have to be tied to there being a murder investigation being involved with this family. That could just be parental choice. But according to Lauren and Heather, Don and Tony had volatile arguments. And in one of them, they overheard Tony say to Don, "You murdered your wife." Even if that's true, it's not information that you could use. You can't even use that in court. Don and Tony do wind up getting divorced. If Tony has knowledge about what Don did in this case, that might be our best chance at seeing some justice here. If they did go through a divorce, I don't know how long ago. I mean, this is a post from 2013, so it's been a decade since then. Maybe Tony is the person that we're hoping will come around and actually pick up that phone. In a dispute over assets, Tony threatened in a text message that Don shared with Lauren to tell the authorities the truth if he did not back off. It's vague. I don't know what the truth is. And if that was really that Don had killed Sherry, why would he have shared that text message with Lauren? Over the years, Don has let his daughter think that Al killed their mother. Don has cut off any efforts to reestablish contact with his daughters. My family and I think Don killed Sherry and Tony was an accomplice. Interesting. I mean, I guess maybe after the fact, but I don't know. Maybe she could have been part of the planning on that too. I have no idea. According to what's happening in this message thread, apparently Don does reply to this email. And the reply says, "I received your email and your opinion. I do not begrudge you your grief in the loss of Sherry. I share it. It has, however, clouded your judgment and colored the way you look at things. Let me be clear, as I have countless times before, I had nothing to do with Sherry's death. You and others have methodically turned my daughters against me based on lies, deceit, and misinformation. Beyond that, there is no further use in my trying to convince you or even communicating again. I will not respond to future like emails." Once again, we don't know if all this stuff is fact or not. But we do have another post here by someone named Paula. I worked with Sherry back in the 80s, and I'm so saddened by her death. I hope the person responsible is brought to justice and her family finally gets the peace of mind they deserve. So very tragic. And there are more posts from the person I think might be Ken, sharing more information here. Of course, as always, we'll have all the links that you need in the description box down below, but just keep in mind, if you get into pages 2 and 3, you're going to be looking through a lot of nonsense. One more post from Ken. We think it's Ken. One more post from Truth Seeker. The weapon was a semi-automatic pistol, 9mm as I recall. The cops found 2 casings. They have not recovered the pistol. All of that seems to line up with what we've heard. Outside of, I haven't seen anything that actually says that it was a 9mm. But this last point is kind of interesting. The casings were of 2 different manufacture. Odd, but true. Another interesting detail there. And I think with the database, the ballistics database that they put it in, they've probably noted like the ejection marks on the casings. I think that's what they're likely going to look for in terms of matching it if there is another crime that gun is involved with. But I don't know. This case, just 25 years. A mother, soon to be a mother for the 3rd time, and her baby senselessly taken in a parking lot. In very much what seems like an execution style killing that makes no sense. We've got no motive from the actual scene, nothing that's clear. It just seems like it's a hit. It seems like it's a hired hit. And when you crack into the interpersonal dynamics here, we've got a lot of heat pointing in one direction. We really do. So we need to help the FBI with this. We need to help this family with this. We need someone to do the right thing here and bring the answers that this family is looking for. This is a photo of Ken and Jane Young. They've also moved out of the area. Let's get a little update here. The media attention was and is still tough, but both Ken and Jane believe that keeping their daughter's death in the forefront of everyone's minds will eventually help law enforcement bring the killer to justice. The murder of someone you love is such an extreme grief, said Ken. You're angry at what happened, at the system, at everyone. But we found we could talk about it with each other. Ken admitted he had a hard time dealing with his feelings. After Sherry's murder, he was filled with anger and burned out at work. It led to a fairly early retirement for me, he said. I was just not functioning. Eventually, the Youngs put their house up for sale and moved to central Pennsylvania, back to the farm where Jane had grown up. Their home is on Siblings Lane, fittingly named because Jane's 3 siblings also have built on the land. The move was bittersweet, at least for Jane. It is beautiful, peaceful, and quiet, she said. Sherry used to run all over this farm when she was little. Still, there is part of Jane that feels like she left Sherry and Kelsey behind. Sometimes it's hard for me to be happy I made the move, she said. Jane does still go back to Virginia often to visit friends, take in a football game, and make a trip to the cemetery where Sherry is buried with her baby girl in her arms. Solved or not, we're still going to be miserable, said Ken. But I would sure love to see some justice. We would love that for you too, Ken and Jane, and we really do hope that it's coming. FBI is offering a $10,000 reward. All the contact details that you need in the description box down below. And if you want to show some more support to this family, we also have a link down there to this Facebook page, Help Seek Justice for Sherry Culp. This is run by one of her sisters. So let's show some support to the family there as well. If you could just take a moment, click that link, give them a like, send them a message, just let them know that we've got people out here caring about the plight that they've been in for all this time and hoping that answers are coming to them soon. Do you guys have any other thoughts on what could bring justice to this case? Let's talk about that in the comments down below. And I just have to say thank you so much to all of our supporters on Patreon. We can't do this without you guys. We have always run limited commercial ads ever since I got started here on YouTube. We do that for your benefit as well as the benefit of the families of these cases that we're trying to help. I don't want you guys bailing in the middle of a video because you hit a 7-minute ad about something completely unrelated. Of course, we can't do that without your support. So a big thank you to new patron Naders, who I believe is re-signing. Thank you, Naders, for coming back on Patreon. If you'd like to help support the channel, please visit LordanArts.com. There you can sign up for Patreon, sign up for PayPal, buy merchandise, or even buy us a coffee like Candy Bishop recently did. We really appreciate everyone that helps keep us here doing the work that we're doing and trying to do it with as few ads as possible. Take care, everyone. Have a nice weekend, and please join us again on Monday for a brand new episode of Case Cracked right here on the LordanArts channel.